I wanted to talk now about the economics of the movie Avatar. Now, don't want to do a review here. I'm sure everyone has seen the movie. Yeah, it's a pretty decent movie, but I think it's interesting because James Cameron, when he made it, he seems to have gone out of his way to make something that's scientifically, um, that's really close. It's not very fantasy. That's very science fiction. That's very true to as close as we can anyway to science. And although I've never heard him say, I think he did for economics as well. And one of the reasons I know this, or I think this, is in the movie, in order to work on this planet mining, you have to spend 6 years on the journey out and 6 years on the journey back, and it's an extreme. And then you work there for 6 years, and it's extremely hazardous. And so one of the things that they say a couple times is that the pay is very high, and this of course makes a lot of sense. I mean, for 18 years, all of it hazardous. Even the trip is hazardous. You would be paying the employees an enormous amount. And if you look to how expensive it would be for them to run something like that, at one point they say that the little stuff, the unobtainium, which is a horrible name by the way, but the unobtainium that they're mining is $20 million a kilo. And if you look at how much they're able to carry back and all that, that actually makes that's a number that, if that was correct, that would make sense, assuming that $20 million and there hasn't been tons of inflation or whatever, because they're you can go to Vietnam and spend $20 million on a head of lettuce, 20 million dongs, I should say. So I think that they said what would be a plausible amount, because I looked up there's a guide that they published to go along with it, with all the background details on the logistics of the whole thing. I didn't buy it, but I browsed through it at Meyer just to check this out. And the ships can carry about 300 tons of cargo back, not counting the crews and stuff. And if they brought back 300 tons of gold, it wouldn't be enough money to justify all the expense. But if it was something that cost $20 million a kilo, I'm sorry, 20 million a kilo, that would make sense. And so, but I think what it illustrates here is something that most of us would call the socialist economic problem. Now, of course, this is something Mises came up with in about 1920. He wrote a book about it called Socialism. I'm sure all my subscribers are aware of it. It is basically considered something that makes a socialist planned economy impossible. However, a couple years ago, I saw a lecture by Art Carden at the Mises Institute where he made the case that this same knowledge problem, basically, if you don't have prices, if you don't have private property, if you have a single owner, then they don't have prices between buying and selling, and they don't know how to allocate resources. He made the point that this would also apply to a hypothetical corporation that controlled everything. That's part of the reason it's impossible and can't happen. And I think this applies to Avatar because on Pandora, this corporation owns everything. They're the only owner of anything. They pay everyone's salary. They provide everything. They don't order supplies on Pandora. Now, what they do at Earth is a different story. But on Pandora, they don't have private other entities. There's one owner, and it's this company. Now, this may be contradicted. There is actually at one point in the film, the bad guy, the evil colonel, who played General Pickett in the movie Gettysburg, I forget his name, Stephen Lang, he says something to the effect of, first round is on me, implying that when you get your food, you pay for it. But this does not appear to actually be the case, because they're all fed in the cafeteria, and I think that would be just a mistake of the writers or a figure of speech. Everything on this planet is owned by this corporation. If you read the book, they actually have a state-granted monopoly on extrasolar exploitation of resources, so they are the only organization here. And this problem this socialist calculation problem, which I think might be misnamed because it doesn't only apply to socialism, it applies to any monopoly, and I don't mean that in the sense we normally do. I mean it in the sense of a single payer for something. For example, they have limited means here on Pandora. In Pandora, they can only produce so much. They can't. I mean, sure, it would be great if they had 1 million bulldozers and 1 million helicopters, and but they can't. They can't produce everything. They only have so many laborers. They only have so many resources. They only have so much capital. Most of the stuff is actually built on Pandora. They only import the things that they cannot produce themselves, and they can't produce an infinite amount at any time. So let's say, for simplicity's sake, that all of the production is handled in one factory, and say someone comes to the guy who's running the factory and says, okay, we're having trouble cutting trees down. We need 1,000 new saws for the machines that cut down trees. And the guy who runs the factory says, no problem, that's only going to take 75% of the capacity that I have. I can have that to you tomorrow. 10 minutes later, someone comes up and goes, I need 100,000 rounds of ammo because there's a rebellion in the Neolithic tribes that live in the mountains. Okay, what if that's going to take more than the capacity? The two together might require more capacity than they have. How do they decide which one to make? First or second? Or how do they divide it? It's not enough to just say, well, we need the bullets are a priority, so you have to do those first. So does that mean that as long as anybody wants an additional round of ammunition, that nothing else will be produced? Or does that mean that you make some minimum amount and then you make a little bit of, the second most desirable good, and so on and so forth? And at the same time, the factory owner goes to the miners and says, okay, I need more steel and iron and copper. But at the other time, he comes and says, but I also need more sulfur and saltpeter and whatever. And then they have to ask themselves, okay, do we curtail production of one or the other, or to what degree? And the thing is if they're all owned by the same guy, the same company, if there's no private property individuals who are subjectively deciding how much they value stuff, then they have no way of really even knowing. And you're going to end up in situations where they're going to have too much production of one thing or too little of another, and it's going to be, it might work, but it'd be extremely wasteful. And that's of course a problem when you have really limited means. If the society is rich enough, people probably aren't going to starve. But if you're out, on the frontier as they are in Pandora, that could be a real problem. And this isn't just something we'll have the computer just decide. You'll get in these arguments with the Venus Project people, it's the same problem. They'll say, well, there won't be private property, but you all get, say, a beeper, and you'll just say whatever you want. So you take your beeper and type car, or violin, or couch. You just click, click. But when you do that, you have no, when it's not yours, there's no input into the cost. I mean, you could say, well, violin takes this much physical resource and this much labor, but if you're not actually giving anything up for it, then you don't even know how to value that cost. It's like monopoly money, and I think Rothbard said, there's no such thing as playing at market. We can play Monopoly, but it's just paper. But if you really had to sell a hotel that you owned, you act differently than you do on a board. And or if you have a clicker that says, you can have as much as you want. I mean, okay, this is kind of bleeding into the Venus Project thing, which I'm not going to do a video on anytime soon. But I thought it was really interesting. I mean, this isn't like, I didn't watch the movie and go, oh, I hate this movie now because Pandora would never work because of the socialist economic calculation problem. I'm just pointing it out because I think it's actually a really good illustration of a situation where it just couldn't work. I think they would need to actually set up a private property price system, and basically have like an actual human society. You can't have this artificial thing where there's one entity that owns everything. And I mean, like I said, not faulting the movie. How many people have heard of the economics calculation problem? There's probably botanists who watched it and said, "Hey, you can never have a tree that does that," or whatever. Fair enough. But I just thought I pointed out that I thought it was a good example, and I would recommend people watch the Art Carden interview or lecture on the topic because it was pretty interesting. Basically, the bigger a firm gets, the more of a problem this is. I mean, if you just yourself own 1 acre of land, you actually have the same problem. How much of my land should I have for firewood? How much of it should I have for gardens? How much of it should I have for pleasure? You can't really quantify these in an ordinal way, or in a cardinal way. You can only do it in an ordinal way. But when you magnify it, the problem gets harder and harder. So on my 1 acre of land, I might waste, I don't know, 30 cubic feet of timber. On Pandora, it's conceivable that they could be wasting millions of metric tons of, supplies. So, I just thought I'd point it out.